Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paco. Yes, we met with Paco a long time ago. He was a professor of mine, and 2 weeks ago I went, Paco, to the Sahara, and I remember that we went with a van from Barcelona to the Sahara at that time. And now I don't understand how we did it in...
We were young.
Yeah, because I mean, we did, this time was 5 days, a lot of driving, and I thought...
Tete was there.
Huh?
That van, Tete Spelta.
Sí, it was the alternative trip that we decided to do before finishing the degree. Some people went somewhere else, but we decided to go with the professor because he had this idea. You were teaching biogeography, right? So we took a van and we went to the Sahara. So it was great because we had, and we did practical field ecology because we were because we were stopping once in a while and we're looking at all this gradient of aridity. And I remember that we were looking at the altitude and vegetation. Yeah, we did a gradient. So yeah, it was great. And yeah, I work in fire ecology, and it's not that I thought that biological invasions would be a great topic, but I was interested to do something more on conservation, and I thought that this topic was not very common in Spain or even in Europe, and I had met a professor who worked on that, and I like it very much. But I would say that if you have, because I guess that there are some PhD students here, if you are interested to do a postdoc, think about a place you want to live. Because I think that this is very important, because I mean, you don't want to go, if you are not that interested on a topic or to the site, just go somewhere that you like. And I was looking forward to live in California. So it was a great place in terms of personal experience and also professionally. So if you think, I don't know, this or that, just think, where would you like to go to live, and go, and that's it. So, well, the thing is that I had translated some of the parts of the presentation in Catalan. So now, okay, I have to think back in English. And I gave a talk at CIBECOL on the impacts of invasive plants, and I thought that because I was here at CREAF, I had to do something applied. I have to explain something useful. And indeed, in the last years, I have worked with semi-quantitative risk analysis, and I would like to talk a little bit about that, and especially to talk about 2 semi-quantitative risk analysis that might be useful in terms of applying them in Catalonia, and indeed one horizon scanning. Emily Garcia Bertú has applied for one of these networks with the idea, and Joan Pino, as the coordinator at CREAF, will participate, and many of you might participate if we get funded to do an horizon scanning for Spain. So, okay, so risks. What risks are? I mean, we hear about this word many times, right? We hear about risk of infection, risk to get injured at work, traffic risk, or risk of social exclusion, right? And we know that there are tools to somehow, when we see one of the risks, to remove this harm, right? So we talk about risk prevention. Is this the name in English, right? Okay, so we wash our hands not to get infections, right? There are all sorts of risk preventions, and in fact in the screen at the beginning there was, okay, if you have to evacuate, you do this and that, and also noise might hear your hearing and all that, right? We have a circulation code, and also we know that education is very important to reduce the social risk of exclusion. So what I would like to talk today about is, okay, something about the quantitative models of risk analysis, and I'm not an expert on that at all. I'm just going to show you in order for you to then understand the semi-quantitative risk analysis, right? So these ones are made by experts, right? I mean, not only any ecologist has the skills to do them, right? But these ones, the semi-quantitative, can be used by experts and not even scientists. And I would like to talk about these tools. Specifically, I would like to talk about the risk of impacts, the GIS and the ACAT UCN. So this was a prototype that we, well, in collaboration with other people, I was not leading that, was then transformed to the ECAT, ECAT, and now the UCN has implemented it, or is going to implement it. Then I would like to talk about the protocols of horizon scanning, because I realized that even before this word was used in biological invasions, we had used that at CREAF. So I didn't know at that time, but we had used that. And well, some of the applications, past applications, presence, and features. So what's a risk? The risk is the probability that something that you don't want might happen within a frame of time. So the possibility that something happen and the impact might be strong, right? And if we look at the Wikipedia, the environmental risk is the possibility that something harmful or catastrophic in the environment might happen because of a natural phenomenon and also a human action. So the natural risks will be the ones which are associated with the meteorological or climate, like an earthquake, un desllavissament, com es diu això? Landslide, volcano, or a tsunami. And then we have the anthropic environmental risk, and this would be this catastrophic explosion that happened in Bhopal in India, or like the Chernobyl, or this ethanol collar, whatever, or this petroleum spill. Okay, and we also know that they are linked. For instance, wildfires are natural phenomena, and floodings are also natural phenomena, but because of our activities and changes in land use, this might occur more frequent, right? Okay, and we also know that there are tools and having information, like for instance, in terms of provide a map risk of the seismic activity. We know that it's very important to know about the geology, the type of rocky materials, and we have devices. And then we can provide these maps about areas with high seismic activity, low, etc. And of course, I have to show a map of fire risk, because I mean, you know a lot about that. So CREAF is the scientific center working on that issue. So nothing that I can tell you about that. In terms of biological invasions, so these are some of the exotic species and invasive species that we have here. And here I have selected species that were occurring like, well, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, like for instance this big perch, or the Carpobrotus in the coastal areas, and also the parakeets. But since I left to Sevilla, there are new species. At the time I was leaving, the tiger mosquito was just starting to be established in Sant Cugat, because it was the first focus, and now it's in many areas of the Mediterranean. It's in Andalusia, it's already in Malaga, not yet in Sevilla, but it will arrive at some point. We have now the apple snail in the Ebro River, and there is a great concern about their impact in rice productivity, but also it might have impacts, of course, on the macrophytes in the lakes. And nobody's talking about that, but it's a big issue. The Vespa velutina, it was at the time that we were participating at the alarm project here at CREAF, that I remember that people in France mentioned, we have this in the other side of the Pyrenees, this is going to be a big problem. And I don't know, but very fast it has spread in Spain and also in Catalonia. We have this blue crab that it's in the Ebro, it's also in Guadalquivir River. It's fished and used as food, but it has a great impact in the whole trophic level. And a few months ago, right, there is this small fire ant that arrived here also in Catalonia. So this is increasing. So in a way that this is the map that Paco showed us at that time about the biogeographical regions, but nowadays these biogeographical regions, some species don't occur where they have evolved, but they are moving from regions to regions. So this will be a map of trading, looking about all the movements, transport movements that there are, and this brings associated species. So for instance, I like to show this. These are snails, terrestrial snails. And if we look at the native species in the wall, so we see that they have different clades, and depending on when they are, and there is a positive or negative relationship between the phylogenetic distance and the geographical distance, right? So this is the classical distribution of species that we might think. But instead of looking at the native species, if we look at the exotic species, this is what we have. We have a species classified in two phylogenetic clades. We have this group and this group. And most of the species in this group are in the North Hemisphere, but also in Australia, and this one will be in the South Hemisphere. And there is no significant relationship between the distance, the geographical distance, and the evolutionary distance that these species have. Okay, if you are interested on the impacts, I have to recommend you this book that we have edited about all types of impacts that biological invasions might have, not only on biodiversity, but also on health or human well-being. The stages of invasion would be, well, some species are transported, some of them might get introduced, naturalized, some of them came invasive if they spread very fast, and we're mostly concerned about these few species that at different stages that might cause an impact. About the the quantitative risk analysis, this is, for instance, well, one example. This would be an example of risk establishment of the mosquito tiger. This was done in a few years ago. It would be interesting to see whether this map holds or whether this has changed. There are also maps that you can build, in terms of the expansion, and this was done almost 10 years ago about the areas in Europe that the species might expand. As I mentioned, the Vespa velutina are here, and these were areas prone to be invaded. And in fact, indeed, they are in these areas. And in fact, indeed, yes, it's very abundant in the Basque Country, but also very, very abundant in Galicia. And some of you might know more than me about these species distribution maps. You have information about where the species occur and the climatic, the land use, etc. information about where they occur, and you can build these maps as these ones of Núria Gassó, that, for instance, this would be from Artoteca Calendula, and this are Butilon Theopastri. These are the areas where it occurs, and these will be areas vulnerable to invasion. And this is another example. So this would be quantitative risk assessments. Something that people working on biological invasions like to show is that this distribution of species not only are conducted using climatic variables, but also land use variables. And for instance, if we look at the range size of the species that are most invasive according to IUCN for amphibians, aquatic invertebrates, aquatic plants, birds, etc., this will be, well, 2000, 2050, and 2100. You see that for some species, they will reduce their range, and for some species will remain the same, and for some species, they will increase. And this is something that I also always like to say, because people say, just out of the blue, biological invasions will be more important in the future, or will increase with climate change. This is what usually people say. But this is not necessarily true. Each species will face climate in a different way. And for instance, on average, well, these are only 4 species. For amphibians, there will be a decrease. For aquatic invertebrates will be an increase. Aquatic plants, an increase. Also an increase of reptiles, terrestrial plants. But even if terrestrial plants, on average, they will increase, some of them will decrease, right? When at the time I was still collaborating with CREAF, we also built these maps on the risk of invasion, but not on particular species, but on the richness of a species at a geographical area. So this will be a map of the level of invasion, meaning in green would be less than 1% of exotic plants, from 1 to 5%, and in red would be more than 5%. And we did that because there is all this information about floristic releves that they are hosted at UB by Xavier Font, where he has information, well, we could get information about the percentage of invasion of different habitats, and then we did this crosswalk between the different types, types of releves and their corresponding UNIS habitats, and we could build this map. So we did that for Spain, other people did for other countries, and we could build this map. And if with information of different scenarios of climatic change and also changes in land use, we provide the future projection of invasion risk in different scenarios. This is one scenario, for instance, and here you have the level of invasion, the potential currently, and this will be areas where there will be an increase, right? And this will be areas where there will be a decrease. So I don't know why people continue saying that with climate change, biological invasions will increase, because in some areas they will increase and in some areas might decrease. This is some work that Belinda Gallardo did recently, and this is not only plants, but 100 of the most invasive species in Europe. And this is important to show that, okay, this will be at present. The areas where more species occur will be this one, and this, the ones in blue where there are less species, well, it's the ocean. And in the middle term projection, many species, the idea, well, the projection in terms of not only climate, also land use change, and also the corridors, will go more north-east, right? And also in the long term. And for instance, for plants, what would be the scenario for plants? For terrestrial plants, and this is only for 18 plants, so the range of expansion would be 2%. Some people might say, okay, this is not much, but okay. And in a decade, so there would be 54 kilometers north and 16 kilometers so east. Okay. So to do this risk analysis, you need the expertise to do that, and I don't have this expertise. And most of these analyses, and if we consider the risk of transport, the risk of establishment, the risk of increasing the abundance, the risk of spreading and cost impact, most of these modeling analyses, they look at the risk of establishment. This is the most done, and not on impact or less on spreading. So, what in fact I would like more to talk about and to know more what you think are about these protocols on risk analysis that are simplistic way to, because they are not used by experts, but they are based on the scientific evidence in order to estimate the invasion risk, and you can do that at different stages. The risk of the species to be introduced, the risk of the species to establish, to invade or cause impact. So this is the first page of a thesis in the Netherlands. So this will be like a screen in the airport. So, okay, this species can go through the country and nothing might happen. It might not invade, it might not spread, not cause impact, and probably this is snail, so this will be red and it cannot be introduced. And compared to the other models, there are many protocols of risk invasion, and most of them consider all the different stages, the transport, establishment, abundance, spread, and impact. So all of these stages are considered. This will be one of the oldest, and this was one of these protocols that it was invented in Australia. Australia have a biosecurity protocol for many things, and the first let's say tool was this questionnaire that asked questions about the biology of the species. This was for plant, the biogeography, climate matching, and all sorts of undesirable traits of the species. And it does, you have to say yes, no. It's very simple, yes, no, based on the scientific evidence. And it has, questions. Each question has a grade, a punctuation. At the end, you have a score. If it's lower than 1, you accept the species to enter the country. If it's larger than 6, you don't accept the species to enter the country, and you cannot decide if it's one of these. So this is something very simple, but this doesn't mean that it's simple to apply, because it depends very much on the information that you have on this species. For instance, how can we apply that? At the Ministerio, well, you know that there is a big concern about eucalyptus. Eucalyptus are invaded in in the Galicia area, some species are, but of course they don't want the species to be considered invasive, because if it's considered invasive and if it's regulated that it's invasive, they cannot plant it and they have to remove it, right? So this was a tool that was used in order to quantify and rank the different species to know which ones have the higher potential to be invasive or no invasive. Even if some of them are already invasive in the area, it's a way to quantify their level. So globulus will be 24 points, Guni 7, Nitens 15, or Sideroxylon 10. So it's one way to use this tool. Another, well, it has also been used, for instance, in different countries in order to classify also and rank a species that some lobbies, let's say, are interested to introduce for biofuels. And in fact, for biofuel, the species which are interested to be introduced are species that have fast growth and they spread very fast. So no wonder why some of the species interested to be used are some of the most invasive species like Ailanthus altissima or Nicotiana glauca. So which challenges have these risk assessments? I mean, these risk assessments are, okay, you are in your desk, you have a computer, you have the scientific information, and you answer some questions, and then you get a score. And as I mentioned, there are many of these protocols. Many countries have built their own, so many institutions, right? So the main challenges that they have to face is that they have to be transparent in a way that it has to be unambiguous. I mean, you have to read the question, and it has to be very clear what it's asking and the information that you need to provide. And we do that at a master's course. We do some practicing work with some very simple protocols. And even if some questions seem very clear, I realize over the years that there are some questions that are not clear at all. And these are always the same type of questions. Also, they have to avoid redundancy. So the protocol should not double counting. For instance, sometimes they ask, does the species has impacts on ecosystems? And then it says, does it has an impact on nutrient cycling? I mean, for me, nutrient cycling is a component of ecosystem, so it's redundant, right? Also, it has to be user-friendly. And this, the one I show you, is very easy to understand and user-friendly. But there are some internet applications that I don't understand them. I mean, they are difficult to understand, even if they are useful, but you need a tutorial in order to understand them, how to use. I think that it's important that they have a broad scope in terms of, for instance, whether you can use them with different taxa or different habitats or different ecosystems. Some people don't agree because they say that the questions that you might ask for plants is not the same as the question that you might ask for vertebrates, for instance. But I realized by my short collaboration with the administration working in conservation that they don't care. Usually it's the conservation for flora and fauna. So if they want to compare, sometimes they have to decide on based of the same criteria, right? Also, something that is important is the scaling issues, because many of these protocols, you rank a species for the whole country, for a national park, and the information that you have in the bibliography refers to small plots, that the species has a decrease of native species at the plot level. So how to quantify that at the precautionary principle, el principio de precaución, right? So it's not that easy. Also, it's very important that it can be reproducible, right? So it has to contain systematic elements, no? Like a template that you can do it, another person can do it in the same way, and then you can compare. And also, it has to be flexible. So the protocol has to be built, I think, in a way that if in the future you want to add new questions or new information, it has to be possible. For instance, now all the protocols have to have whether the establishment or the impact or whatever will increase with climate change. So it has to be something easy to fit in. And well, this is, for instance, okay. These protocols can be used, as I mentioned, for different stages of invasion. And some of them are generalist about all the stages. And I would like to focus on a couple that they only consider impact. So these are the different taxonomic groups, the number of established species that we have in Europe, established, right? So for instance, terrestrial plants, we have more than 5,000 established exotic species in Europe, right? Which ones are causing ecological impact? It looks like more than 300 species. This is only, well, this is less than 6%. Economic impact, 300 species. So I think that for instance, if we have all these species, these protocols are a way to rank them. I mean, I don't think that these are very good in order to know a lot about a few species in terms of the impact that they cause or might cause. But if you have many species, you can use these protocols. So why focus on impact? I already mentioned that at CIVECOL, and not on establishment or introduction. Well, because there are limited resources, and so we require to prioritize on which species to manage. Many species are already introduced, established, or invasive. So it's not that it's not like in Australia about these biosecurity protocols that you have to think what will happen if these species will enter the country. They are already there, and we're concerned about their impact. Also, impact is a major argument for policy and management action. Manager and policy actors don't care much about biotic homogenization or whether they have one more species. They care if this species is causing some type of impact. So, well, to identify the invasive species causing major impact, and also because many species have the potential to be introduced, if we focus on this and if we want to make some prevention, if we can focus on the impact of the species that can be introduced. And this will be an horizon scanning of not introduced species, and I would like to also talk about that. Well, when we as scientists look at impact or quantify impact, what we do? I mean, what we do is to look at the effect of non-native species on some ecological process or patterns. We have invaded and non-invaded plots, or we remove the invasive species in some plots and not in some other, and we look whether the effect is significant or not, right? So it will be the change on or the deviation from a reference state, both in the direction or the magnitude. We can do that also at different levels of ecological organization, at the individual level, on native species, on the diversity of species, on nutrient cycling, on whatever. And also we exclude the societal judgments regarding whether the impact is positive or negative, because this is also an issue that comes very often when talking with managers and policy makers. So, as ecologists, we know exactly what we mean about impact, right? But when you look at these protocols, the way that they rate impact might be different. There are different ways that these protocols do it. One would be by the intensity of the impact. So this is the most familiar to us. So would be the magnitude of the impact increments with the amount of the invasive species, right? Also, some protocols rate the impact on the number of impacts, right? Okay, an impact on species diversity, an impact on changes in nitrogen pools, etc., etc. Other protocols consider the spatial extent of this impact, whether the impact occurs in different habitat types, for instance. Also, some protocols consider a higher impact if the habitats that are affected are of conservation concern, right? Or whether the species that are affected are also species of interest, endemic species, or vulnerable species. Other issues that some of these protocols are the persistence of this impact, on whether if you remove the species, this impact still is maintained or disappears. And on whether, it's a little bit the same. And also whether this impact will be transferable with the same climate change, and whether climate change will interact and increase the impact, right? So this is just to show you that when you have to interpret one of these protocols, it's not as easy as going to a scientific paper and say, okay, it's significant, so I put a 5-point or 4-point or whatever. And there is also another issue, is that when you look at the literature, even if the same experiment is repeated in different sites, we know that in ecology, context dependency is el pan de cada día, no? For instance, in this project that we also did here at CREAF, it was epidemic, we look at the species richness in invaded and non-invaded areas, plots of Ailanthus. So this was in Mallorca, in Menorca, in Bagó, Porquerolles, Sardinia, and Crete. We only work in Menorca. It's not that we had the chance to go traveling all over. But the neat thing about that was that we did the same protocol, same number of plots, the same size, the same way to measure. And even if the protocol was the same, we find that at some sites, it had a significant impact on species richness, right? And here the magnitude would be the same. Here, the impact will be lower, right? Here, no impact in Sardinia, and in Crete, 50% decrease. So there is a lot of context dependency. And these protocols also have to take into account this variation. The assessor has to give some information on how confident he or she is about scoring the impact. So the uncertainty has to be considered, and uncertainty, there are three sources of uncertainty, right? One would be linguistic, which is the imprecisions on verbal or written communication, is something that we don't understand quite well. Stochastic would be the spatial or temporal variation, as the one I show. And epistemologic is the level of expertise that we have. So when rating the impact, not only you have to say how much impact is causing, but also how confident you are. So this is one of these protocols that it was made by Wolfgang Nedwick, Sabrina Kunzwig, and Sven Wacher, and this was to impact a species, and the impact is can be on native plants. So for each invasive species, the impact on native plant, on native animals, on competition, disease transmission, hybridization, ecosystems. So this will be environmental impacts. And also this protocol considers socioeconomic impacts, like on agricultural production, animal production, forestry production, infrastructure and buildings, human health, and human social life. So this will be the different mechanisms of impacts. And then how to rate that? Okay, there are 6 impact categories. This is very simplistic, but of course there is the paper where it's more well explained. 0 will be no impact known or not detectable. Of course, this might be misunderstood because 0 can be that there is no information or there is no impact. This is one problem that many of these protocols face. And then, okay, from minor to major impacts, but as you'll see, it's not that easy to classify them, even if there is a good description. So it's not an information that you might get with only one published paper in a Science Citation Index journal. You might need several. So the maximum impact, okay, the way it's done is, okay, the maximum impact will be 60 points because you do that for each impact type, okay? So we have done this exercise for all the major invasive species in Europe, and for instance for plants, we know that this will be the most harmful plant species in Europe. So it's not a perfect system, but if you have 300 species to compare, it's a way to start. There is a variation on this protocol that it was led by Tim Blackburn with the idea to provide a protocol that follow the same procedure than red listing species. And this is the name, ACAT, right? And this protocol, I am mentioning it because I think that in the future you might hear it more about it because, as I mentioned, UCN has implemented. In fact, today and tomorrow, there is a meeting in Cambridge about how to implement that because it's very bureaucratic. It's not that it has to go through a revision process and etc. So the impact mechanisms are more or less the same as the ones by Wolfgang Nedwick, but and they are only related to biodiversity and ecosystem processes. And for instance, biofueling, it's one that it was not in the other one. And another that it's new is the interaction with other alien species. And also this protocol, it has different categories that follow the same rationale that for the UCN red listing species. For instance, the minimal concern will be the species that have an impact but has no effect on individual fitness of native species. And the massive impact will be the species that have an irreversible community change and might cause extinction. So it's the same procedure. So this might sound you very familiar to the red listing species. You have one species, it might not be evaluated. You might think that it's exotic, but it's not exotic, no alien. It might be data deficient, right? And then if you have the adequate data, you classify it as massive, major, moderate, minor, or minimal concern. There are 2 time frames. You you have to record the maximum impact. So also is a principio de precaución. If there are many studies, you take the worst case scenario. Is the worst situation. And also something that it's not clear to me is that you have to record the current impact and potential impact, and to me this is not easy at all. I think that it's easy to talk about the potential impact, but the current impact, okay, if you do it at a regional scale, it's easy, but if you do, let's think on Catalonia, it might be that in Catalonia this species is not causing impact, or there is no paper scientific information on the impact it's causing. So this might occur. So as I mentioned, the worst case scenario, and of course it requires to add the documentation and the bibliography. And also for each species you have to mention how confident you are, high, low, medium or low, and this depends on the type of evidence, whether it's observational or you infer from other similar taxa, or there is enough scientific support. Also it depends on how consistent the information is, well, and the quality of the information source. I mean, this is very simplistic, but I mean, if you want to know, I mean, the guide is very, very. And also, this will be a coordinated process as the red list. So there will be contributors, so people who do the risk analysis, and this has to be reviewed. And then, okay, there will be some authorities and a unit, a secretary. So this will be like submitting one of the risks would be like submitting it to a journal. Because it has to be checked whether it's well done or not well done. Okay, so this is more for existing invasive species. But what's going on is that every day or every week or every month, new species are entering a country and being invasive in that country. So this will be for the different taxa. This will be a species, for instance, that this will be new records. This is a global analysis. Huh? This will be new records. Bueno, esto no funciona ya. Vale. So in that case, the tool that you use is an horizon scanning, which this is the definition from the FAO, which is methodology that use different steps to identify issues at the edge of current thinking that might have significant impact in the medium to long-term future, right? So this would be, in terms of biological invasions, to identify and rank a species that are not yet in a country or in a region, but might be introduced or might establish and cause impact. And of course there is a lot of interest on that, especially on islands or in small colonies. For instance, we have done this exercise for Gibraltar, and even if it's not an island, it has its own economy and its own way of life. That what's of concern in Gibraltar, it might have a very strong impact, right? Because it's a very small territory. But we did that a long time ago. With Hara Andreu, with her thesis, we did that even before this horizontal scanning on biological invasions was coined. We did a risk analysis of potentially invasive plants in Spain, and the way we did that was, so this would be the two exotic species that are not yet in the country, but if they would be, they would cause a great impact. And at that time, out of the blue, what we did was, we look at the list of invasive species from different organizations. We also look at invasive species from neighboring countries. We look at invasive species in other Mediterranean regions. And of course, these were hundreds of species. And from this, we took the ones that were in 2 of these lists. And then we conduct one of these risk assessments. We shrink that to 80 species. To 80 species. And basically, we based that on whether the species was invasive in a similar climate and whether the species was having impact. So we did this sort of exercise. What happened was that we did that on ourselves, 2 of us. And of course, there is a lot of bias. And in fact, this is very scary. In a cost action, what we did was an exercise in which different experts from different taxa conduct a risk assessment on impact using different protocols. So each of these is a different protocol, right? And this is the coefficient of variation of the species with the different protocols. And this is very scary, that even if these were experts, 2 people using the same protocol, they might come to a different result, right? So even some of them, like for instance this one, the coefficient of variation is huge. Why? Because some of these protocols, as I mentioned, they have many challenges. They are not very clear enough. It's not well explained whether you put the score of maximum or moderate or weak or average. It's a mess. In conclusion, this has to be a teamwork, because if you do it by yourself, you might get to some conclusion that it's very particular. So you might know about the Delphi method, which is a structured communication technique that it was originally developed as a systematic interactive forecasting method, which relies on a panel of experts. So Helen Roy, she's the queen of the Delphi method for everything. She's also the leader of Alien SAE, one of these cost actions. She was the leader of a previous cost action, and she has led an horizon scanning for Europe, and also she's doing for different British colonies, and this is why I got to do it for Gibraltar. So, okay, you have to identify the score of the exercise, define the thematic groups. For instance, you take a team of experts on vertebrates, on plants, on invertebrates, on whatever, depending on the case. And I am explaining that because we have applied for a proposal, and CREAF will participate on that, to do that for Spain, okay? And then you have to select the criteria for which you will start the big list of species, right? For instance, as I mentioned, present in adjacent countries, okay. Present in adjacent countries, well, connected to the area of concern. For instance, for Gibraltar. For Gibraltar, it was very easy. It was very easy because we had information on all the invasive species in the surrounding Mediterranean area, Mediterranean coastal area, in all the coastal areas. We also had information on the species sold in nurseries, that they don't buy it in the UK, they buy it in Andalusia, right? So these are species, and also they have a botanical garden. And we know which species they want to introduce and plant. So we start from a list of species that have the potential to be introduced. Is very easy. They don't have agriculture, so no weeds will be introduced. So, but for each case will be different. For instance, people working in the marine systems, they might have another criteria. They know which boats they arrive, from where, which species might arrive, whatever. Or for vertebrates, there is only one pet shop. and it's very easy to know where they buy the species. So it's so well. And then, well, first you work at the individual level, and then you work at the, for instance, and you score the likelihood of arrival, the likelihood of establishment, and the likelihood to have impact, and you score that. You also put the uncertainty, and you start from a long list, and then you discuss that with a team within the taxa, and then, well, you have a workshop. So it's like, okay, you score, rescore, and do it. No. And then you do a consensus workshop when the different taxonomic teams propose the worst species, and well, you discuss and it's very important when you provide this information, for instance, to the administration. In that case, the administration in Gibraltar, so they were there and they were interested, and they have the information of the big list of species and the ones that they have to prioritize. And then they have to think about the pathways of entrance and think whether these species can be intercepted or how they can be avoided to enter to the country. So I think that this is very useful, especially for islands. For a large region, I don't know, but anyway. So for instance, for Europe, okay, let's think about freshwater invertebrates. Well, this would be, well, the thing is that, okay, you can start by 25 species, you might discuss, you might add one, and then you have half of them, and you make these 3 lists, the ones that you prioritize and whatever. Okay, we're using a similar exercise to rank the invasion potential of a species stored in nurseries. So what we have done is to call all the nurseries in Spain. They have provided list of species, and with a method like this, similar but more simplified, we have built different lists of species. We have found a species that they are invasive and regulated in Spain and in Europe, but they are still sold. We have a list of species that are highly invasive. So our recommendation is that they should not be sold. And we also have a list of species that there is information, enough information, and we have high confidence that they might not be invasive, because otherwise they always say that we complain about everything and we are always negative. So we also have this green list or whatever you can list. So we already have, and of course for many species there is no information, but this is always the case. Okay, so as to end up, so many introduced species cause environmental and socioeconomic impacts. The semi-quantitative impact assessments of biological invasions are the scientific basic tools to help on management. I think that they are good when you have to compare many species. They allow for species prioritization. They need to account for uncertainties, because if the impact of one species, for instance, might be very high, but you are uncertain, this is like saying that the species, or almost like saying that the species might cause a low impact, right? And also something very important is that this has to be done through a collective work, because if you do it by yourself, you are very biased. You might even realize that when you talk with colleagues about a scientific issue, you have preconceptions about even the most scientifically well-documented issue. You have your own prejudice and your own bias. So I think that it has to be a collaborative work. So that's it. So that's it. Thank you.
We have some time for questions.
I'm a bit surprised that when ecology is becoming very, very quantitative, you invoke the use of semi-quantitative risk assessment.
No, I am not invoking that. I think that they are useful for certain circumstances, and if we as scientists don't provide these easy tools, even if they are easy and semi-quantitative, what the administration and the managers do is that a team of experts meet and decide whatever, without a systematic way to do it. They just write a report.
Yeah, but I think so you can produce very simple answers with very complicated mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
And the stakeholder doesn't need to know everything about the method, just the outcome. So and now we have a lot of tools that can allow you a better, a more accurate prediction of establishment, impact, spread, and everything. So
If we have tools.
We have tools. We have modeling process.
But the people in the administration, I mean, just think about somebody who's working in the administration and doesn't know anything about the statistics.
No, I understand. But you can tell them, okay, you have this species, and our model says that this species is going to spread through all Europe in 20 years. So that's the information that you can compare.
Yes, but you might have that for very few species. The issue they face, for instance, in plant protection, is that they receive lots of imports, or they have to be aware about the pet trait of many species. So they have to somehow prioritize for which species they have to focus more, or which pathways. So I agree, yes, for some species, like for the zebra mussel, there is a lot of information, right? But for some species there is not much information, and then you have to realize on not only establishment or spread, but well, I don't know if I understand you well. No, it's not that I invoke that this is the way to do it. I just think that sometimes administration cannot wait for us to do the research. I say, tell me in 2 years what would be the distribution of these species. Is it going to invite the Monseigneur or not? Okay, and then they have to pay you for you to do this work, right? And if the question they have is for a single species, like the apple snail, that's fine. But many times the concern is not about one specific question, but about many species. Like for instance, imagine that they want to build a new park, right? Or in Barcelona they say, okay, we want to tell us from all the species that we have planted in the parks, which ones have the potential to be invasive, because we'll remove them. You have to do something systematic, no? Because you are going to deal with 300 species. So you cannot do a model of a spread of all of them, or because it will take forever, and they are not going to fund you for sure. So you can say, okay, there are these tools that yourself you can use it, or we can use it, but in a fast way. And I will prioritize to remove this one, that from the Ciutadella, that one, and that one. And of course you might make mistakes, but you have provided something at a realistic time scale. You don't agree?
Well, this is the typical question of the conservation since 30 years ago about the pragmatism and the soundness of our knowledge. But this is not my question. My question is if in these protocols, in these procedures, is any attempt of verification of the risks. Maybe verification of calibration of the method, in the sense maybe from some retrospective
yes. In
basis.
fact, we have done that. We have, let's say, validate the Australian with risk assessment for Spain. We know in Spain that we have some exotic species that are not invasive and some exotic species which are invasive. So we used the protocol to see how consistent it was, and it was very conservative. Mm-hmm. Almost all invasive species, they would not be excluded, and many of the species which are not invasive, some of them would, if they would ask whether the species would enter the country or not, they would not allow. So of course, these protocols, if not all, have been validated is not the way. Look for the consistent, no, they have another name. Well, yes.
Okay.
No, I agree. I agree.
The next question is related with your answer. When applying these protocols, how important is the context, the regional context and the social context? It's not the species, but it's focused to a specific...
Of course, it has to be, but you might make mistakes. Yes, as I mentioned, for instance, in Gibraltar, some species, they say, no, this species is not going to be a problem here because we don't have agriculture, so this wheat is not going to occur.
So, and now let's try to go about the algorithm.
The algorithm.
What they mean is the expert algorithm. Because I assume that if you don't have information, complete information about all the behavior, the performance of each species, the expert
sometimes you
is
don't have
a kind of intuitive or conscient algorithm by extrapolating information on other species, or have anybody trying to go further just to know which is the decision process in this risk assessment. That may be a kind of approach to the scientific or rational. What I mean is that perhaps this is more related with cognitive science, in the sense that the person, the expert, has the species, he or she knows some things, and eventually there is a lot of incomplete information to have the assessment, but they fill the gaps in some way to eventually produce a semi-quantitative answer. Maybe it could be interesting to understand which is the process in which different people is doing that.
Yes. Well, in fact, okay, this is very important, and it's more on psychology.
Yeah,
it's more on psychology. I don't know, remember exactly the results, but okay, I show you the coefficient of variation for the different protocols. So Pablo García González Moreno, oh no, well, you don't know him. Okay, so what he did was to look at which factors might affect this variation. Factors relating to the protocol, right? And factors related to the degree of expertise, for instance, and also factors related to the taxonomic group. So he put that in the model. And also factors about how much information there is, because this is very easy to know. And I cannot recall whether the species more well known, yes, they had less variation, but I don't think that as more expert you were, and this was something subjective, because you also had to say, I have worked with the species, there were several categories. I have worked with the species, I know I have not worked with the species, but I know information about it, so there were different categories. I don't think that this was important, and I tell you something about that, is that I have not made any analysis on that, but I think that if you know a lot about one species, you say, I know a lot. I have written this paper, so I know this is minimum moderated that. And you don't pay much attention to the other work that has been done. So I don't think that not necessarily if you know more about the species, have worked more on the species, might do a better job. Not necessarily.
Yeah, well,
to have information, yes, all the information. But if you are part of the person who has provided this information, not necessarily you.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and at the end what I mean is that probably the future will be some kind of automatical system, kind of artificial intelligence for this kind of issues.
Well, in fact, for instance, CABI, what it's doing is that because CABI has information, has a compilation of invasive species with their distribution, with their impacts et al., they are preparing a program that they call it horizontal scanning, in which you ask for a specific region, and then the program looks for the species, and you can do that as much complicated as you want, the species in neighboring countries, the species in the same climate, right? So of course, there are ways to do it somehow. Yeah.
More questions?
So, well, if Emily Garcia Bertu get this network funded, this will be one of the goals for Spain. Anybody interested to participate and not feel guilty? ¿Eh?
Nosotros diremos en público.
Yeah.
If there's no more question, we can thank Montserrat very much for your time or for illustrating. And she will be over here this afternoon.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to talk with her, está encantada.
Sí, sí.
Gracias.
Gracias.